we got everybody out real quick, but I wanted to get a couple of people back on screen, particularly to, kind of the question that we're going to be asking really from that is, what are we seeing from that? It's for some reason my webcam just decided to not show me, so
you see
You're there. We can see your picture.
yes, exactly. I took Vanessa's advice and got
There you are.
Hi guys. All right. So because the question here quite often is, I think this was a really important discussion around, what is the humanity? How are we bringing it to table? A lot of the plans that were in the desk drawers all of a sudden became relevant. So it really is that aspect, and we'd like to invite a couple of folks onto stage to answer the question as to what are you seeing from that? Hi, Juliet. Awesome that you're back. So what are you seeing from that? Because oftentimes we talk about these things, but I'd like to get a couple of different perspectives. So if we could have Tim Pape, are you online? Let me see. Tim? No, I took type time. So someone who's in recruiting, I know we have a couple of recruiters in the room. So if you're a recruiter, come on screen. What do we have? Allison, are you in the room? Okay. Brian O'Neill, can you come up? You were there yesterday. You're going to come today. Or Toby Hansen is supposed to be here. I know. Toby, are you here? Fausto. Fausto, can you come up on screen? I'd love to hear your opinion as to what are you seeing from that. So all these aspects of the adaptive learning organizations, what our roles are, the pieces of job architects. So what are you guys seeing out of that? So hi, Brian, welcome to the stage.
Hey there.
Hey there. So a lot of great ideas, a lot of different viewpoints. What are you noticing? What are you seeing out of what was discussed in today's panel?
One of the interesting things that resonated with me was when the talk kind of moved toward the idea of curiosity as one of those key areas that needs to be brought forward. And my sense is that there has to be more of that in the space, which in my opinion means that how does that expressed behavior wise? It is behaviors like when someone brings up a point or someone brings up some kind of comment, your answer is more around the lines of, tell me more about that. I'm curious. That's an interesting point of view. Let's explore that a little bit versus, no, you're not getting what I'm saying, or this is how we've always done it, or yeah, that's great, or even being patronizing and saying, literally to the point of patting somebody on the head and saying, that's great, that's fine. Now moving along, let's move to the next topic. So to me, in the learning space, because that's, where I spend a lot of my time, that is a classic facilitator skill that's extremely important to use when you're in group discussions to allow other points of view to come to the fore and thereby achieve consensus. Where I think it's missing a lot in the workspace right now is among senior leaders. There is a perception that I get among many senior leaders in many organizations that they've fought their way up. They're in that corner office, they've got that VP or higher title, they have arrived, and therefore the work is done, and they get positional power because of where they are in the organization, and so therefore their opinions obviously carry a huge amount of weight because, my God, I've been here for 30 years or 25 years or 20 years, and I know everything there is to know about this organization. And that is a stifling of curiosity, because if the senior leaders aren't curious about where we are, where we're going, what the world looks like right now, what change is like in an organization, how it moves forward, then the company will simply fossilize in place. And everybody will wonder why the company is not very successful over the next 5, 10, 15 years, when they even might have been previously. So, there's all sorts of ways to express this, what got you here won't get you there, things of that nature. And to me, that single word, curiosity, is just one of those skills or mindsets. It's really more of a mindset that we've got to encourage as much as possible in a world where things are changing so rapidly that at this point, it's almost laughable how we used to talk about how change was occurring at a faster, accelerating pace. And we used to talk about that in theory. And the year 2020, I think, will go down as the decade of the year. It feels like 10 years worth of crap has gone on just in the past 9 months. Not just COVID, the whole Black Lives Matter situation, and the entire sea change of how people are perceiving systemic racism and things of that nature. The political situation here in the U.S., we're experiencing that, but it's also going on in countries like Great Britain and Brazil and other countries around the world, Hong Kong. So this is a massively upheaval year, and I think one of our defense mechanisms has to be curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what I think is so interesting about, and I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's better. Okay. So what I think is so interesting what you said about that, Brian, is sometimes I can see a disconnect between when recruiters can identify something that is a key to success, like curiosity, but it doesn't filter up to senior management, right? And so you hire people who are very curious and in that, in that mindset, but then if they bump up against leadership that is acting more like you were talking about in terms of resistance to change, or feeling like, what they've done to be successful is what you still need to do to be successful, I think you can run the risk of hiring people that then end up leaving because it's not filtering through the entire organization. And I do think that that's someplace that in L&D we have the opportunity to work closely with recruiting, and make, try to design some interventions for that potentially, because I do think it holds organizations back, and I think it particularly holds them back in the space of D&I.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my friends, Mandy Troy, who's going to be coming in tomorrow, she likes to say, pay attention to the hippos in the room, the highest paid person's opinion. And it is that piece of how are we choosing to opt out, and what is it perhaps about fear or scarcity mindset? And I think there is that aspect of, yes, I've worked very hard to get to this position. What is perhaps the perceived threat there? And so instead of saying, how are we, here, what is the nimbleness? How are we, to Suzanne's point, understanding what are our strengths? So how are we having things that are not all done by a central office, but also saying, okay, what's that aspect of, here, how are we pulling in different opinions? Do we really understand, the user? And just our customers, but why do our folks need our customers even? So helping change those conversations. And I think we have a funny role in learning, because at times, the old role of the gesture, it gets, it was that you were able to touch on the touchy subjects that no one else was allowed to. And that was the real role politically of a gesture, was to bring these topics to the table. And learning, I believe, has a really unique position because we are asked to do that. And we are also asked at the same time to help our leaders get into that brave space. But there is an opportunity here for influence, and to say, how are we challenging those paradigms to really be the subject of today of, is this future proof? And like you said, particularly in D&I, particularly as we look to, how are we dealing with the safety economy? How are we understanding what can actually be evolved and what truly an innovation is? So tapping into those unique human capabilities where we really are teaming, where we're getting, different opinions in, and then co-creating on solutions that are not scalable, and to say that those thinking of everything had to be big, everybody had to go in the same goldfish bowl, that those things are changing to say, okay, what's really needed here and what will actually help.
One of the things that we've seen that is starting to help with some of our larger employers is, because we also work with a lot of startups, is the hiring process for a startup. And what a startup has always wanted is somebody with potential and that's able to work with the pivoting and the movement around of the organization. And if some of those lessons from startups can move more into organizations, then that's certainly something that would make a significant difference to organizations. And we're certainly seeing an awful lot of that starting to occur, where we're sharing in the other direction, the learnings from startups into corporates rather than the other way around. And I really do think it makes quite a difference to the types of people you get, and that curiosity, that there's a bit of an element of risk. I mean, certainly from a startup ourselves, we've when people have asked me how we've dealt with the latest 6 months, it's not actually that different for a startup to the previous 6 months or the 6 months before that. It's always been a roller coaster and a bumpy ride, and are we going to make it, and all of those kinds of things. And so now it just feels like everybody else has joined us in that in that theme park. And so the kinds of people that work well in startups now, I think, are starting to realize that that's actually not that dissimilar to where maybe some of the larger organizations need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the ironies is that a lot of large companies also tried to found startups internally in their organization. Probably didn't work because of, what does this change putting a mirror in front of my face? Yeah. Very good. Very good. So Fausto, what are you seeing from that? So reflecting upon the discussion we just had, what's your perspective? What have you been noticing out of these discussions?
So a couple of things. One is a back to the basics kind of thing. I think that this lifelong learning concept is is a drum that we have been beating for a long time. And when I say we, mostly L&D professionals in HR, but we didn't really get beyond that. The executives will not do it and say, yes, that makes sense. But when the rubber hit the road, it came down back to bottom line and cost reduction and those kind of things. And in the last few, certainly a couple of years maybe, but certainly heavily accelerated by the latest challenges in the environment, I'm seeing lifelong learning even being posted as part of job descriptions and out there when you're interviewing, they are putting a lot of focus into, can you pivot, can you be agile, can you learn new things? So it's been interesting to see how something that we had been talking about for a long time, it is actually making more sense. And I think it's a combination. I think when Jan said that COVID was just a catalyst, I think that's true. It's just an accelerator. But we've been seeing this, at least for the last 5-7 years, when the actual digital transformation process started, we started seeing so much change in what you do, everything. I mean, from a year to a year, that people need to reinvent themselves constantly. So the lifelong learning thing is or theme is really catching up, I think, and we in L&D are uniquely positioned to really help organizations to really figure out how that happens, because it is not just a simple thing, right? So all the way down to the ability and the attitude of people and how we can put the tools to do that. So that was one. The other one was you touched on employee experience, and I mentioned that I've used workforce experience, recognizing that is the extended workforce, is not just the employees, right? And I loved, as someone in the panel said, colleague experience. I love that. And I think in that scenario, the thing that I'm seeing out there also is same thing. Is something that consultants were beating the drums, and potentially people in HR were saying, hey, this is important, we need to take care of our people. But more and more we're seeing the connection between the workforce experience and the customer experience, and how those two things connect. And if you do not take care of this one, you don't get the other one either. So how can you, so making that connection more and more, I'm seeing conversations with business people that they are making sense out of it. They are saying, okay, that makes sense. And we're getting the data. I guess also is one of those things that we didn't have the data. So we're seeing more data. We're able to process more of that data and show it and demonstrate that. And the last thing is a little bit of a combination of the other ones, but it has to go back to the agility that we were talking about just earlier. Is how people can be really agile. I was reading how the software development process evolved in the last few years to come to the what is called DevOps and agile in that environment. And I was looking at that, and I was saying, it is the same thing that we have to do with ADI, and it's the same thing we need to do with our own development. Is how can I am working on something today, and tomorrow what I was learning today, I need to be able to go back and go forward, go forward and develop myself. And again, L&D is uniquely positioned to help in that process. It is really a challenge. It is really a challenge to all of us in how we put the right tools for people to learn on the moment that they need to learn.
So a question that I would throw out to people, and this might be a little bit leading, but how do you cultivate agility in people? How do you cultivate flexibility in people? And I know from my experience, and I know a few other people who are around this conference who have studied the arts and theater a bit, is you know what I'm going to say, Liz, right? Is like improv, or thinking on your feet, or actually like activities where you are thrown into a situation and like they're totally made up. They're, from an improv perspective, but it actually really trains you in flexibility and adaptability. Liz, I just keyed you up.
Let me throw one thought. I think that this is when when organizations need to really walk the talk. We talk about of that being important, right? We talk about taking risk. We talk about people that are entrepreneurial and so on. Organizations and leaders need to walk the talk in the sense of we need to recognize for that. We need to really, when someone takes a risk, whether it goes well or wrong, we need to recognize it, and we need to foster that. The moment we start doing that, people are not afraid. I think it has to do with change resistance and being afraid and those kind of things. So if you are concerned that what you're going to say, that you're going to say something, provide an opinion, is going to be looked bad, then you won't. Yeah. So I think the first thing is leaders need to instill courage into their teams, so people actually speak up, are willing to learn something new, are willing to put an opinion on the table, and so on. That's kind of my take on that.
I think you're right. I think it can be a learned behavior to keep your mouth shut in certain circumstances. And I know, like, one of my previous roles was in compliance as a compliance officer. Everyone loved me. It's a very popular job, and I had to very, very consciously, when people were brainstorming about ideas, like they would come up with stuff where I'd be like, well, that's not legal, or, like that's not going to fly. Our lawyers are going to say no to that, but I had to like keep my mouth shut because I didn't want to squash creativity. Like that's not where they were at now. They were just brainstorming, and it was a leadership position. Like I had to be very cognizant of the power of the language that I brought to the table, and allowing it, even if I thought it was a terribly horrible idea. you know, because they would figure that out on their own.
One of the things that I think is extremely important around the idea of how do we cultivate agility within an organization, it's an individual commitment to one's own micro behaviors. It's an individual commitment to really review what specifically are you doing that is perceived by others as promoting agility versus promoting rigidity, I guess would be the opposite of that. And they are sometimes extremely little things that I think leaders sometimes don't think about. I've had teams that I have managed over the years, and some of the things that I would do would be never to sit in the same place in the room from meeting to meeting. Sometimes stand in the corner. Just to make sure that everybody gets a little cognitive dissonance around this idea of who's an authority and who has the final answer, and how does that all work. There are things like that you can do. How, you know, what do your communications look like? Email or telephone or so on and so forth. What questions are you asking to open communications? What kinds of things are you suggesting to people? What, you know, how are you perceived as a leader in terms of whether or not they feel comfortable surfacing an idea, or you know, this may sound silly, but you know, how do you react to those kinds of things? Do you react with utter curiosity, or do you react with, oh God, here we go again? You know, this is just delaying, you know, this is causing more time wastage, or so on and so forth. So it's perception is reality to folks within their job roles. And if we as leaders don't take that responsibility and say, I'm the one who's driving that, because every little thing I do, every little thing I decide to do, where, you know, how I come across, how I answer questions, who I call on, in what order, who I go to for particular projects, or so on and so forth, all of that creates a perception among teams. And so we have that huge responsibility, and it goes down to very much micro level in terms of examining our own behaviors and what we're doing in the context of team leadership.
I think for some people in organizations, agility, and so like the idea of improv for a lot of developers I know would be their worst nightmare, and so they might be fearful of what agility means in an organization, in terms of it being something that sounds like it might be out of control, when actually we can have processes and controls around being agile that allows everybody to feel comfortable with what the process is that they're going through. The company can still be agile, but everybody doesn't have to manage constant change within their own environment, because that can be troublesome, different. And so I think whilst agility is a great thing to have, having some controls around it and process around it can make sometimes people feel a lot safer in that kind of environment. There is that element of stability and feeling safe.
I think that Liz was having a problem unmuting her microphone, so she's maybe joining back in, I think. But I would love to hear the perspective, if somebody's willing to share it, also from a job seeker. If there's anybody out there who is a job seeker right now who would like to come on stage. Because I think the perspective of what you're hearing from recruiters, or what your process is like right now, like when you hear somebody say like agility is super important, curiosity is super important, what questions do you have about what that shows up like in an interview process? Or if you don't want to come on stage, just put questions in chat.
Yeah. We get a lot of questions from candidates when that's put on a job description, and often it's around, does that mean, you know, anything goes? Does that mean they can ask me to do anything? Does that mean what I'm doing today isn't what I'm going to be doing next week? And so that's where sometimes it can sound like it's just something that an organization's put in there so that they can do whatever they want to next week, rather than it being something where actually it's a controlled strategic direction of the organization. that allows them to move in different directions. So I think we need to know what we mean when we talk about a company being nimble and agile, and describe it more. What are you actually looking for somebody to do as part of their job, or how does that occur within an organization and culture?
Yeah, you're right. Because like we talk about that absolutely at Bloomberg, at having like a startup mentality, and we're agile and we move fast and all this.
Does that mean you have to stay up until midnight and drink coffee?
Right. I mean, we also have 20,000 employees. We've been around for quite some time, and like we're also a big company. So that agility, like, what does that mean in the context of our company? Yeah. And I can say for us, like, it means that like one of our core values is like we don't have job titles, right? So I call myself the head of learning for the global data division. I made that up. Like, that is not official because we don't have official titles. But one of the reasons how that value ties into agility is that nobody's in a position to say that's not my job.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's like we're all interlocking. And I think one of the things that, and Kim brings it on the side as well, is there's a lot of confusion as to what agile really is. Because, originally it was a group of teams saying, okay, what are the principles of how we want to work together? And they just happened to be in IT. But it was really as, what does good look like? How do we understand how we want to collaborate? What are we trying to deliver on as a team? And that was really the core focus. And it was that piece to say, what fosters nimbleness? What, how do we deal with barriers? What is the truth that we're trying to seek? And then it got, into this piece around, okay, IT, okay, obviously most people know it's like, okay, how do we, rapidly iterate and then relearn? What are the things? And then, we have our product owner who then, we determine. So it's also in the meantime become very top down, whereas at the beginning it was really about, how as a team do we want to collaborate and how do we want to deliver? And so I think in terms of how do we understand what those next iterations, to your point, Suzanne, about agility are of, if we're looking to say, okay, just 2 steps forward, just not even, because oftentimes agile is around, what are those things that are irritating my customer? How do we help with that customer experience? To saying, okay, if we're thinking beyond that as to what's changing in this context. So oftentimes our customers don't even know what, and so it's that, how do we understand what the context is, what the needs are, and how can we work with that and bring those folks in? I like to say great teaming is like Cannonball Run, that film from the 80s. Is that, here, so I'm aging myself with that, that there's a goal. We know why we're working together, but in terms of how we get there, it is that pivoting. So it's drawing in, it's doing connected thinking, it's being multi-literate and saying, how are we tying these different things in? And it's, when we talk tomorrow also about and then later on today about, what are those 21st century competencies? It's no longer, Rafa, it's no longer just, I see it and then I do it. It's how are we connecting? What is the problem to be solved? Or what is the real, where are we actually trying to get to? And not determining the how we get there, but understanding that there's not going to be one best solution, which is kind of how our training has been in the past.
There are a couple questions in the chat. One is from Alwyn, who said he didn't have a webcam. So one is, and he's a job seeker, which is, how do you show your potential to to employers in the interview process? Anybody want to take that?
Julia, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously my preference and tendency is towards referrals and recommendations. And so I'm always going to mention that it's really, really useful to have a recommendation into an employer, and to have somebody that is in your corner and that can talk about everything that's not on your CV that you would really like somebody to hear. And that tends to be how people put people forward through what we do. But I think there's an awful lot of stuff you can do with your CV, and I know we talked a lot about that yesterday in terms of some of the core principles around CVs. But I think where we're talking about curiosity and we're talking about some of those skills, opening it out into things in the interview that you've done that show that. So, I'm fascinated by the space station and astronomy, and every time the space station goes over, which it has been recently over the UK, I've been outside on my patio, normally with a glass of wine, watching it. And so those kinds of things where you're talking, and when you talk about things that you're really interested in, it brings you automatically talk passionately about it. And so I think if you can bring some of that human nature and the things that you're passionate about and the things that you are curious about, or that you've had to change about yourself, or that you've learned new, actually you're not just telling them about that particular thing, and that actually I am a bit of a geek and I like space, but you're actually talking about much more than that. You're talking about how you work and how you're energized, and what gives you, what feeds, what nourishes you, and I think that tells a lot more about yourself sometimes than your CV.
Beautifully said. I also like, I know I'm not going to make any friends, but one of the things is, CVs are common practice, but they're not the best practice. That's, in terms of how are we predicting future performance, and particularly as problems become more challenging, those aspects about how do you collaborate, how do you, what's your social competency to be able to work through teams and with teams who, are not in the same organization. Exactly to your point, how do you make that CV more real so that it tells a real story as to what are the aspects that will help you be successful in the role? And oftentimes when you're just doing like a laundry list of, requirements of what the job needs to do or what I've done, you can't really talk to that story in a good way. Yeah. Okay. All right. Great question. I think that's really, really good. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to put everybody back onto the Space Geeks Unite. I love it. Okay, so with that, we'll definitely have a table. I love it. Brian has called it out.
Exactly.
So happy. So we're going to release you guys back out onto the floor with the inspiration of the panel, with what you've heard here, and to say, okay, what are you taking with you? What are some key elements that you derive that you'll be, saying, okay, that's going to be an anchor for me when I think tomorrow morning when we're asked this question, what stuck with you from today? Okay, so I'm going to put you back out into the wormhole to the tables, and then call you back in before we do the break and say, okay, what did you guys derive? Sound good? All right, then.